The thing that I love about local news is that's where you realize, oh, I do have an impact, and I can impact nationally by impacting my own backyard. It just takes a minute to get there. And so people who feel like they don't have an impact in the world should really be reading more local news, because that is a very critical step to being able to change the world around you.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Creator Business Show. Today, we're talking to Ned Berke, who is the VP of Audience Strategy at BlueLena. We're going to discuss how small organized groups have been people who make history throughout time. We're also going to talk about publisher churn and how publishers can make more money just by making sure that their credit cards of their subscribers are up to date. That was a big surprise to me, and we're going to talk about a lot of things that are obvious when they are in front of you, but maybe the connection was never there. So stick around. It's another great episode of the Creator Business Show. Ned, thank you for joining us. Why don't you give us a quick introduction of who you are, what does BlueLena do, and how are they helping people today?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's good to be here. I'm the VP of Audience at BlueLena. I work hand in hand with the publishers that we work with and our partners, our tech partners that are all part of the stack, which I can surely talk more about. But the problem that we're looking to solve is that, particularly in local journalism, although we don't just work with traditional kind of local news operations, there's a lot of knowledge about sustainability. There's a lot of knowledge about what the best practices are and what you need to do. And there's a lot of technology that helps facilitate it, but there's still a complete lack of resources and being able to kind of connect the two, right? A publisher might buy into technology, but not have the time, not know what to do. And if they do know what they need to do through some sort of accelerator program, they still don't have the time to turn all the dials and make it happen. And they don't have the expertise or the experience to be doing the ongoing iteration and experimentation that audience development sort of requires for member growth.
Okay. Yeah. You know, I definitely identify with that because I was a reporter before I got into the work that I do now. And I actually did help launch a publication for Breaking Media. Then you may be familiar with them, Above the Law, Deal Breaker, Fashionista. They've got into some other verticals as well. But the benefit that they have of being a publishing house is having a shared CMS, right? And certain, but to get to that scale can be quite costly and needs to be maintained. So is that something that you help clients with?
Yeah, we're CMS agnostic. We don't actually deal with the CMS. Where we are, we're sort of a shared resource for, first of all, for just strategic guidance and, being able to map out an audience development plan and build and execute experiments, because it's not just as easy as saying, well, I'm going to go do this. Is a matter of measuring it and knowing how to do that. And there's shared resources in terms of the ESP. So we have a CRM, ESP, and then we use the Pico stack on the front end in order to kind of connect the dots and make sure that we're engaging users, collecting data, and giving a monetization gateway. But it's really where we are excelling is sort of at the CRM and ESP. For, I guess, anyone who doesn't know, that's email service provider. So in some cases that would be, the most popular is MailChimp. It's not what we use. But we build a lot of automations and, make sure that we're getting a lot of data signals into that technology so that we can trigger messages at the right time. And we work with our publishers to craft those messages and know what they need.
And so, very basic question, but why is this important for publishers?
Yeah, man. It's incredibly important for publishers, and especially news publishers, and especially local news publishers. So I was a reporter and an editor and a publisher. I had started my own publication, and there's only so much one person or a small team can do. And certainly not much that there's always a vacuum of expertise as well. So we are sort of a backbench that really helps them, first of all, avoid burnout, because we're there to give them guidance. A lot of burnout just comes from creators and publishers not knowing what to do next and feeling a little bit lost, and they can kind of spiral and the pressure builds from there. But then there's, just a financial need, right? So a lot of what we do, it's not purely about driving reader revenue, but that is an obvious KPI. It's why most people hire us, but we find ways to turn these engagement tools into tools that power and improve the quality of journalism as well. But staying on the revenue side, it's incredibly important because there's never been really a more dire time in local journalism. I mean, we know it. And 2020 was a record year for newsroom layoffs. The number of outlets that have been shutting down or trimming, independent outlets, it's much harder than it used to be to actually launch. And that sounds contradictory because we have things like Substack that make it easier than ever, but there's a huge discoverability issue.
Sure.
And so we need to make sure that they have the guidance and these resources and at the end of the day, the money to continue to do important democracy building and civic infrastructure building journalism. And so that's why it matters.
Absolutely. So yeah, you said a lot of important things there. You talked about burnout, and that is kind of endemic in the journalistic profession because you're constantly searching for the next story and there's a constant deadlines. But then there's also, like you said, discoverability. So, it's not only a matter of getting the content out there, it's about connecting with the audience. So do you want to talk about how BlueLena leverages technology to help publishers and content producers and journalists connect with their audience? And also what does a deeper connection look like? So I guess that's a two-part question. What does it mean to help publishers connect with an audience? And then how does that actually manifest?
How much time do we have? So I mean, we do a lot on that front. I think about it and approach it in a very holistic way, which is first sort of just knowing who your audience is, right? And learning more about them. And the only way to do that is to engage them in a conversation. So we can no longer afford in media to just say, I have a thing to say and I'm going to say it and I'm going to say it, I'm going to say it. And for some people that really works and resonates, but it's not, especially in journalism where you need to be hearing from the audience about their information needs. That's not always the most, I would say it's usually not a path to success. There are sort of unicorns or, in that model who can just write whatever they want and it resonates. And so it's first just kind of trying to understand them, and we might do that through surveys and modeling and in sometimes really boring stuff, but other times it's also just encouraging publishers to go out and have conversations, whether that is on social media, via email, when they get a complaint from a reader, really talk to the reader about the complaint and don't just be like, heard. And if you have the resources to sort of organize community events, so that's sort of engaging with the readers that you already have in the holistic way. In the more kind of audience development technology, funnel sense, it's making sure that once you have these readers aware of you, that you are giving them a pathway to be in a relationship with you. And the most obvious and sort of traditional at this point way of doing that is capturing the email address. And we use Pico for that. And we capture that email address. Pico is very good with its prompts, and it has a very effective easy implementation, effective and high capture rate. So we get that, and when they fill out their email address, instead of just like it being a normal pop-up on another website where it's an email address that hooks into their ESP, they're actually creating an account, and a cookie is created, and data can start being collected about what they're doing. So we can start looking at that. We put them into an onboarding series. As part of the onboarding series, there's surveys, there's interest tagging. So we're able to collect more and more data points that the reader is volunteering, and providing us through just their behavior, and we can then start to pull that apart and say, okay, here's where the interests are, and here's where your core group is, et cetera, et cetera. When it comes to, we then move them kind of down the journey. We ask them more questions. We make sure that there's always more reporting that's important to them, and importantly, we take off of the shoulders a big burden that exists in any kind of reader revenue program, which is the ongoing message need, right? If you have a paywall, the messaging is pretty clear. I hit the content, I can't get it, I pay money to get the content. There's still messaging involved, still a requirement. And there's more messaging down the line to make sure that they don't churn, meaning they don't cancel or fail to renew. But if you have a free access site with a membership program or donation program, that kind of value exchange is a little lost on most of the general public. It's kind of a new concept, where the value prop is not as clear. It's like, I already have access to the reporting. I came here for the reporting. I have access to the reporting. Why should I give you money? And for a lot of media organizations, that it's like, well, give us money because journalism, because democracy, or because better society. And that's very abstract to a lot of people.
Yeah.
So it requires lots and lots of well thought out messaging, and very focused as well. So through our automations, we're able to make sure that there is regular messaging going on. And then we also coach the publishers to make sure that they are emailing them with regular frequency, and we provide them assets, et cetera, et cetera. I can keep going on. Like I said, how much time have you got?
Sure. Okay, well, let me throw something into that mix. So there's the better society, democracy, informed public aspect of making sure that people are paying. But then are you also engaging with publishers at all about using the Pico platform to create other monetization opportunities and engagement opportunities that are either, a special subscription or a membership outside of the readership subscription?
What do you mean by a membership outside of the readership subscription?
In some of the conversations I've had with folks, we're talking about, the broader creator economy, where someone might have a YouTube publication, or their top of funnel is their TikTok or their Instagram or something like that. And so people engage with them on a daily basis because of the content. And so that makes them a publisher. But then the deeper engagement is, hey, I'm going to be doing a webinar, or I'm going to be here in this city, and you can actually come see me in this city. And so the technology exists today for people to be able to, have one-offs, and those one-offs can be revenue opportunities.
Yes. A lot of our publishers aren't quite there yet. They're still focused on actually monetizing direct monetizing their content or their community as just a support journalism kind of focus. They are doing more and more events. And we do make sure that we are capturing the data of event attendees and leveraging that and understanding that segment more. We have, business memberships. So there are reader memberships, and then there's business memberships, where business memberships can get in and get other kind of perks and access and things like that. There are webinars. There are sort of do this transaction for access to download a file or something like that.
Yeah, perks and access. That's actually a good. What are you doing to educate your publisher partners about perks and access?
So we fire on a couple cylinders with that. We have first, one of the core parts of an engagement with BlueLena is, there's the licensing of the technology and all of that, and there's that stack. But when you're in our managed services, you also have ongoing coaching and support hours. And the coaching, that's with me. That's what I lead up. And what we do is that's where I'm looking at the person's business, and we start saying, okay, what do we do next? Once we're past this sort of onboarding point, what do we do next? Sometimes that's this month that's coming up. That's the anniversary of the launch of your membership program. You have a lot of annual subscriptions. You're going to have a bunch of churn. We need to do a program around that and make sure we have automations to recapture if anyone cancels. But more often, once they're past those points, that's where we're talking about kind of more experimental and exciting things that we could be doing to really push the envelope. So there's that's a big component of it, and that's where they sort of decide on these things. But we also sort of have a community amongst our members, our coalition members, and there's a weekly newsletter where we're sharing tips and advice and new things going on that they can consider trying. There is a Slack group for people to ask questions, get instant feedback, lean on one another. We have monthly webinar roundtables that aren't really webinars. They're just Zoom meetings where everyone can come in and speak over each other if they want. But they're publisher led with the usually focused around something new and exciting that one of the publishers is doing, where we can bring those learnings over to another publisher. That's actually one of the really cool things that we do is when we have something that works with one publisher, it's like, okay, this is all using our technology, so we can now bring it to 100 other publishers.
Got it. So when you say community, you're actually talking about like an innovation roundtable of publishers, and then their scale is hundreds of thousands or millions of readers who can then benefit from the delight and the experimentation that you guys are doing.
Yeah, I'm going to steal that name because it's better than Publisher Roundtable. I'm going to call it the BlueLena Innovation Roundtable.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. Thank you very much for that is your lanyap for hanging out with us today. Okay, so then perks and access. So you made me think about something because you're talking about churn of subscribers of content. It's like I have subscribed to magazines because I want to support the magazine and the mission broadly. I don't read it as much as I could. I don't get the full benefit. How do you educate, or how do you have conversations with your publishers about that churn issue? Because when I think about a software that I use, it's like, okay, well, I get a specific business value out of a piece of software. But when it comes to content, it's like, well, yes, democracy, and yes, an informed society, but I just don't have time to read sometimes the things that I really want to that make me a better and more informed citizen. So then how do you, what does that conversation look like? And not necessarily you have all the answers, but like what are your publisher partners dealing with when it comes to addressing churn and the need that they fulfill for society at large, and then also just on a one-to-one human basis, people have demands for the time.
So what we see is that the majority of churn is through failed credit card payments. And there's only so much that Stripe can do to rectify that. And it sends, by default, I think 3 or 4 messages. If you have turned that on, well, it's by default. And it will also try to auto update the expiration, but that's still the majority of the churn that we see. So we make sure that we have an even more aggressive churn campaign on that. So if they have a failed credit card payment, we will see that. We will be very bullish on it. And if it ends up, they don't end up updating it, we have a whole program around that as well. So it's pre and post churn. But what you're really talking about is engagement, right? Like what happens? What do you do about people who just like go on with their lives? Maybe they were a dedicated reader for months and months and months, and then they go on vacation and fall out of the habit. Because that kind of thing happens. It's, a lot of the times we'll be looking at, first, we're able to do additional site tracking with our technology. So we can kind of see when a user is doing that and try to intervene. If they fall back on their engagement? Do we have a a campaign in place that is making sure we are sending emails of recent top stories or whatever? So a lot of it isn't like I need to convince a publisher to do something. It's, hey, I have a solution for you. Let's work together on putting together what I have the framework. Let's put on the plaster in the walls and whatever. I'm not in construction. um, and we get that out, so they're very happy that not only we identified it, because a lot of the time they're not watching for it, and then we also have the solution to address it. There are other parts of it where it's like you need to learn better best practices, right? Open rates, open and click rates in email. Obviously the world of open rates changed this week with the Apple update, but in a way, it really didn't. It didn't change much at all. The way our stack is handling it's putting kind of Apple to the side, and we still get a representative portion of to see what the open rates are, and we could say, okay, are you engaging people? So I mean, like, that's the first step, is getting them to open an email. On the website, it's a little bit different. We see ups and downs. We see, and the thing that I talk to them about, that is the difference between what was drilled into their heads in newsrooms for so many years, which is page views. And I talk to them about habit, and I talk to them about loyalty readership, and I show them how to build those segments in Google Analytics so they can see it. And you can see very clearly that there are huge differences in the segments of readers who come very often and those who kind of come in one visit and done. I built a tool for this long before joining BlueLena called the Audience Explorer. So if you Google my name, Ned Berke, and Audience Explorer, it'll come up. It's a free data studio dashboard that gets at the core of it. So we get them focused on that, but then we have to have discussions about their product too sometimes. We have a publisher who is very politics focused, and a lot of his audience came for politics, and his traffic cratered after February because the political landscape changed. The pandemic landscape seemed to change for a little bit. His local political landscape changed, mirroring the national one. And it's like, well, you have great food content. So how do we get that front and center? How do we make that? How do we build an audience that's dedicated to that, so you're insulated a little bit from
the vagaries of
exactly, from politics, and you have another pillar to stand on. So it's oftentimes, it's not like I don't have to come to them and say, hey, everything you're doing sucks, go do something else. Mm-hmm. That's almost never the case. It's never been the case. And instead it's, hey, let's find this other great thing that you're doing that is not getting the attention it deserves, and figuring out like where the audience is and bring it to them.
And Ned Berke's free money for publishers is make sure that your readers' credit cards are up to date.
Yeah.
Is that the number one revenue driver or of lost revenue, is credit card churn?
I believe so, yeah.
Wow.
And I don't think we're unique in that. I actually think, with the creator economy and the emergence of things like Substack, you're going to see a lot of people who are striking out on their own, and have seen a lot of people striking out on their own over the past year. And that initial launch goes really well. And the issue is what happens a year after, when renewals come up, when engagement plateaus, when excitement plateaus. And a lot of publishers don't have a plan for that, other than, well, let's just keep doing what we're doing. Maybe if we do more of it, things will change. Mm-hmm. And there needs to be more access to tools, more access to services and knowledge in order to address those changes. Otherwise, you're going to see more burnout. You're going to see a lot of things that people were excited about over this past year. Unfortunately, I think you're going to see them collapse.
Mm. So that's a really interesting point. What do you think it takes to cultivate a creator mindset in a more traditional publisher? What I just heard you say was that the traditional answer to driving engagement and revenue is just more of the same, but it could be less of something, not just more of something more specific to the audience. like you said, food content, right? That the author thinks of himself as a political contributor, but then the audience is like plenty happy to get food content. So my question to you is, what does it take to create a creator mindset amongst a more entrenched traditional publisher?
I don't think these things are as different as people think they are. I think part of it is sort of stage and life cycle, right? Most of these publishers that we work with, even if they're a bit larger now, because we still work with purely small publishers, small, maybe what some people would call medium sized, but they almost uniformly started as 1 to 5 people. We work with a lot of alt weeklies, and these things were started by a bunch of college kids or post college kids or whatever, and they're just like, hey man, let's do this thing.
Mm-hmm. I'd read
And
that.
they were the creators of their time. And then as they grew and added more layers of management and more business operations and more things that really contributed in their era of stability, they became legacy publishers.
Sure.
I think some of it is just sort of about exciting them about what got them into it in the first place, and trying to embrace that culture again, that culture of innovation and experimentation. And sometimes that's hard, but often the best thing I can do is say, here's what some people are trying, let's run a little experiment, and that's like that's the best way to get the foot in the door, because that's what it is. That's like the only difference between big and small is the
Risk tolerance,
but the risk tolerance and the willingness to experiment. And if I can just say, let's do a little experiment
and point to someone and say, this is already working over here, why don't you give it a shot?
And then I do it with them. There's a big change, hopefully a positive change, and then I say, look, this experiment worked, and now I've got buy-in to do larger experiments. And usually that tolerance for trying new things just grows and grows and grows.
So the foundation of that is trust. And then there's that social proof from, nobody wants to be the first to do something. It's very rare to be want to be the first. So, going back to our journalism roots, how do you handle that tension between the commercial and the editorial? Because there's always, that firewall between what the newsroom is doing and what what's going to drive revenue. So I don't want to ask this in a yes or no way, but it's like, what kind of discussions come up around, hey, that engagement thing you're talking about is more of like an advertising and business services thing than an editorial?
It's usually not a problem on the editorial side. And I tend to prefer working with the editorial side. To any of my business side clients, I love you too. And that's because the philosophy and the imperatives of a reader revenue model are very much aligned, when you stop to think about it, with the imperatives of the newsroom and editorial. Most newsrooms, most reporters, it happens, but most reporters and editors are not like, I don't give a F what the community thinks, they're all idiots.
Mm-hmm.
They want to be in that dialogue, and they want that direction, and they want to know that they're having an impact, and the only way they get that is from hearing from people. So on the engagement side, there's that. Often the engagement side improves the quality of their journalism and puts it more in service of readers' needs. The revenue side gives the incentive for all of that, right? Mm-hmm. The reader revenue is ensuring that your audience and your business and your journalism are all aligned. And advertising is not, I don't believe advertising stands in contrast to journalism. But it certainly has supported it for many years. But the directness of the model and I almost want to say the purity of the model is much editorial side has reason to welcome it more. Now, anyone, especially in a traditional newsroom, is going to say church and state, church and state. I don't want to know too much, and if I am just doing what the readers want, I'm going to end up doing
Cat videos all
rewrites
day.
of just whatever. And when we start getting into the data of actually what drives subscriptions, it's trust, it's quality, it's solutions reporting, it's investigative reporting. These are the things that newsrooms love to hear.
Mm-hmm.
That like the work you really want to do, now that's going to be driving the engagement.
And it's not your gut saying it, it's the data saying it.
Right. And that, I'm sorry, going to be driving the revenue.
Right.
So at that point, they're like, oh yeah, church and state, whatever.
Our readers are saying they want this, they're not, may or may not be saying it in a survey, but just in their engagement data.
Right. And when you start focusing on core readership and people who actually pay or have a willingness to pay, the quality of what they're interested in is so much higher. Because the stuff that journalists don't want to do is the super commodified, kind of clickbait and aggregates and rewrites and all of that stuff. And they shouldn't, because that's not what people ultimately pay for.
Right.
Because it's commodified.
So you're just saying that the engagement data proves to the editorial side of the house that the deep investigative work, the service journalism, the solutions material, solutions content, solutions journalism is really driving the engagement, and is the hook, really.
Sometimes, yeah, often, yeah. Again, we deal with a pretty diverse assortment of publishers, but I would say that statement is proven out not by our data, but by just lots of data that's been produced now, right? So data from Solutions Journalism Network and the American Journalism Project, I think. Maybe it's the American Press Institute, and just plenty of others that the messaging and the surveys show that the people who convert are doing it because they do it because of that's a weird phrasing. Sorry. The people who are becoming subscribers and paying for journalism are doing it because they want high quality journalism. I have a case of one publisher who, he was a local news small town publication. He ran a local news small town publication and did a lot of the things that small town publishers do, make sure they're doing all the police reports and chasing all the fires and writing about all the road construction incidents. And then he put up a paywall. And when he put up a paywall, it became like night and day. He realized through the data that the things that people were paying for were school board coverage and civic meetings and investigative pieces and budget pieces. And he completely stopped doing these things that he didn't like doing because they were roadside gawking, right? It's people who just want to see the accident and, that's it. It's no actual impact on society. And once he had the paywall, he began doing these things, and those are the people who converted. And he followed them. That's not just like he just started doing that stuff. He was listening to what they wanted, what they told him in conversation and in surveys, and also what he saw as the most read stuff among those segments.
That's great. So it does sound like your clients are not losing their audience to. They're not losing audience to TikTok and YouTube. They're really, there are people willing to pay, and I just keep going back to that thing about the credit card churn is a bigger problem than, low quality sources of information or user generated information sources.
I mean, again, a lot of our publications are news publications, whether that's local news, national news. There's a lot of opinion stuff. I guess the opinion can be, I guess some of that you do see in YouTube shows and all of that. There's a lot of trade publications, with the exception, I guess, of the opinion one. That stuff isn't really found on TikTok. It's a little bit found on YouTube, but they're complementary audiences. I don't think people are just like, I only want information from one source. and I'm only willing to support one source. Usually people who support a thing, support more of it. The goal here is to train more people to pay for quality reporting. Because a person who's going to pay for quality reporting, they're going to pay for multiple sources of quality reporting. We are not in competition for the same reader. We're in competition. We're in not a competition, in collaboration to create more readers who will embrace and understand the value of journalism.
So it sounds like you're actually coming to it from an abundance mindset, saying that there's not only a $5 pool of money per reader, that there's actually hundreds of dollars potentially if you service the need. You mentioned trade publications just a moment ago, and it's like if you're in a trade and the publication is an essential read, you'll pay nearly any price for it.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's really, for what I do, no trade publication for communications specifically that I'm aware of that I would pay for. But if it did serve the needs of an independent communications consultant, then yes, it's more in the Facebook groups and membership communities, but not necessarily in a publication.
I think those things are getting very blurry.
Yeah. Talk about that. Things are getting blurry. What do you mean by that?
Maybe it's sort of muscle memory that I keep coming back to talking about publishers and publications, but like 80 to 90% of our publishers are running membership programs. And those membership programs are really about communities. And the reporting is the hub of the community and the product of the community, and the lure for new community. But that community is happening only in the interactions around it. And that could be Facebook groups, like you just said. It could be newsletters. And I think when you start, you just said, I'm willing I get my support in the communities. What's that look like a Discord or something like that? I think a lot of publishers are moving in that direction. There are publishers that are doing a lot with text messaging and things like Discord or Slack or Facebook groups. Local tends to be Facebook groups, to the detriment. So I mean, I think well, it's not to their immediate detriment. I think we all have reason to be concerned about Facebook.
Yeah.
All kinds of things.
Well, someone was a bit more generous. I think it was Caitlin Holloway, who was formerly community at Reddit and is now, at Alexis Ohanian's VC fund. And she was saying that the problem with the communities on Facebook, to say nothing of the organization and the technology itself, is just that people are there for so many different reasons that if you put up your membership or community site inside the Facebook ecosystem, it's just so heterogeneous that you really have no idea who the people are, even if they're, were they just looking at pictures of their newborn niece or nephew, and now they're going to come in for a few minutes to do community, versus more community centric platforms like Discord, Circle, some of these other things, Luma, that people are using today.
Yeah. I think it's really hard to get a grapple on what Facebook is today, what the job that it's doing for its users is today. And I think it's probably different among different users. This is an area where it's like I'm also a really bad use case. I'm a bad user story. I've just gotten to the point where every time I open up Facebook that there's so many notifications that I'm just like, nope, close, goodbye. I could clear out all the notifications, open it 5 minutes later, and there's more notifications. I'm like, guys, you've overdone the gamification.
Right. Well, clearly they haven't, because they have enough data scientists and researchers to understand what the human psychology is that, these notifications are actually working.
Do they though? I mean, what's their US user base like?
It's declining.
I mean, has it is absolutely plenty, but has the use gone down over the years? And I think it has. I think that's why, well, it's not the only reason why, but they now spend so much time in global expansion.
Well, what's interesting too about that, speaking about the Facebook news feed, and I went to journalism school. Facebook was starting to muscle into journalism in, 2007, 2008. It was a place where people shared things. But you see the evolution of the news feed. What I've noticed lately getting crazy virality. And I actually wonder if these are ways for people to do identity theft and things, but it's like there'll be this post and it says, there's no word that you can spell that starts with an A and ends with a Z, or there's no word that starts with a T and ends with an A. And then people post and it'll get, hundreds of thousands of responses. So that's just the trend. It's like the algorithms continue to change and prioritize certain things. And then, when an election's coming up, the algorithm will prioritize, certain types of news sources and quality sources.
Yeah.
But, one of the things that I was talking to Nick and Jason about in, co-founders of Pico, we spoke for the podcast a few days ago, was about, passion, profession, and geography as the three anchors of content and community and belonging. And the idea now of a community or a place being inside, geography being inside Discord or being inside a community, if the community is large enough, is something that whether people acknowledge it or not, I think people are actually quite comfortable with. There are certainly Discord servers with tens of thousands of users where people spend a significant portion of their life and actually feel a sense of, geographic belonging, even though there is no physical geography to it.
I mean, I think that's right. Is that a passion community though? Is it, or is it a geography community? Are you saying that?
Well, I think it is a geography, in the same way that a mall or an airport is a non-place, but it is a place that you exist. It's like, I think that in some ways a Discord community is more real of a place than an airport, even though clearly an airport is a real place.
Yeah. Well, I'd say one of the big things of the internet, I'm like not the first person to note this, but it's that the communities before were defined by geography because they had to be.
Mm-hmm.
And now they don't need to be. And this predates Discord. I mean, I remember like the early bloggers were always talking about tribes and all of that stuff. And that's what it was. It was the idea that, like you said, there's your kind of work community and your passion, your hobby, and your geography, and those are the three things that you care about. But there is this like tribe. I'll go back to 2003 blog terminology. And there is this because it is more tribal. I feel like it's more tribal than anything else, and it's their identity communities, and they are larger than geographic communities, and what's more, they have the effect of bringing to the surface the differences one feels with others who are geographically around them. So I actually think it erodes geographical community, um, which is not like, I'm not here to say if that's good or bad. I have not given it enough thought. Yeah, I think there are certainly challenges that presents, but
Yeah. But it's, we're definitely in a fortunate stage for the bold risk takers that everything is open for reimagination and the opportunities are vast. There's, for instance, there's a YouTube creator. I don't even think I've watched one of his videos in a year or a year and a half, but I'm a member of his community for $2 a month so that I can have a little badge on my profile if I were to post a comment, just to support what this creator is doing. And am I a member of his community? Yeah, I think so. I'm a member of his community, but I'm not an active. It's somewhere between audience and community member, because I'm a patron, but I'm not a participating commenter. I'm not creating any content to anchor the other members of the audience to one another.
If you live in a neighborhood and you don't vote and you don't have a kid to send to school, and you don't work in the community. Are you a member of the community?
Maybe if you read the newspaper. Yeah.
Yes, you're right. Everyone should read their
Yeah.
newspaper
Yeah.
online.
Well, yeah, I think that you're tangentially a member of that community at best. You are a resident, but you reside in the community, but you are not a member of the community in any appreciable form.
I think we've gotten like way off the course of um,
Yeah.
of reader revenue and audience build, or maybe we haven't. I don't know.
Yeah. Everything circles back because there's a person can exist within a physical space and not be a member of the community, but then a person can exist very prominently within a community that has no physical presence,
Yeah,
and can spend all of their time and money to coincide with the norms of that community, whether it's Discord, whether it's, Minecraft. There's just so many non-places where people feel deep sense of belonging, and there's a lot of money to be made for
yeah,
publishers. I guess what it comes back to me is that maybe I'm not of the generation, but there are certainly vertical publications that are just about these types of communities, or could be like the Reddit review, like what's going on Reddit. Reddit is would be one of the largest countries on earth if it were a country, a sovereign
yeah.
entity.
Going back to the "Are you a part of the community?"
Yeah.
conversation, I think this is actually where local news is incredibly different. Um, because and geographic community, because you said, well, you're not really an appreciable member of the community if you don't really participate, um, until a hurricane comes, until a pandemic comes, and that's why we see these events are the biggest, unfortunately, the biggest opportunities for news, because people who have detached themselves from their physical community, from their geographic community, and maybe are part of other communities, and surely are part of our other communities, realize that their place, their real physical form, not their metaverse avatar, um, has something in common just by being in physical proximity to another person, and the challenges that you face of place. Um, and local news is, the only thing I can think of that can really kind of capitalize on that. What it needs to do is be able to um, emphasize the importance of that when things aren't going wrong.
Sure. You just made me think of something too. I mean, we're often our philosophical tangent about news, but I'm thinking about the percentage of people that actually consume news, and yet this minimal consumption drives the agenda and really creates the reality for so much. If you're talking about, local coverage of maybe a mayor embroiled in a scandal, or something has run afoul of the citizenry, but it's like, to what extent do the people even know that? Because the readership is probably quite minimal, but the political class, the decision makers, are responding to that minimally known event or series of events. If local news is having, you know, five or well, you can tell me what percentage of people read local newspapers, in aggregate. I'm sure it's quite minimal, but we all live in that place, and the news itself actually drives outcomes, even if it's only consumed minimally.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I should point out that like the majority of people still do get local news, right? They get it primarily through TV, radio, and newspapers, but TV is actually the biggest. Now, the newspapers do tend to drive the TV agenda. There's not a lot of education about just the sort of requirement to having information about how things work and what is on the agenda, in order to impact the agenda. And I think that's why a lot of people don't read a lot of news. And Then if we extend that out a little bit, a lot of the news that people get, especially younger people, it's national news.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really easy to, first of all, to take sides on, and also really easy to feel lost and like you can't make an impact. And the thing that I love about local news is that's where you realize, oh, I do have an impact, and I can impact nationally by impacting my own backyard. It just takes a minute to get there. And so people who feel like they don't have an impact in the world should really be reading more local news, because that is a very critical step to being able to change the world around you.
I'm just going to pause on that because that was quite profound. I never really thought of my role in the broader society of being a consumer of local news. But I definitely see the point. I mean, being in San Francisco, where I am, there's a recall effort for Ches Boudin, and he doesn't want to imprison people unnecessarily, even if they have been accused of a crime and arrested. And that does have national implications, because he's saying this is for prison reform, and a lot of people are unhappy about it. But if he's proven right, and it does make a material impact on rates of incarceration and everything, then the effort to recall him, if it fails and he succeeds, is going to have a real national impact. And that election is going to be decided by precinct by precinct, hundreds of voters potentially.
And we did that in New York City. We did bail reform, which is it's not quite the same thing, but it's very similar. And the idea was to keep the jails as empty as possible, and not send nonviolent people into jail, at least before they've been convicted. Then there's post-conviction stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But this happened, and it was a major achievement that could have had national resonance, and has had national resonance. But it's also been largely rolled back in New York, and it's kind of happened quietly, and it's because there was such outrage afterwards, and people were able to successfully do such fear mongering just based on the one premise that people don't read the news, they don't know what bail means. And they think that, and they don't know the difference between jail and prison. That's the other thing. And so they think this is taking people convicted of violent crimes and just letting them go because bleeding heart liberals. And every crime that every tabloid could find to be connected to that, they connected to that, and never took the moment to describe what bail is.
Sure.
And why it's not meant to be punitive. And the difference between the people who are in jail and why they're in jail, and the people who are in prison, why they're in prison.
Yeah. Well, it just goes back to an informed citizenry,
Right.
Well, okay. So you've been really generous with your time. Why don't I let you get out of here with a final question, which is, what do you think is the future of small, dedicated, and organized groups in shaping agenda through sharing content and building community?
I mean, as I said before, history is made, again, not my quote, and I'm probably botching it. I don't remember who actually said it. I believe it was a founding father. I don't know. but history is made, and historic moments are made by small groups of dedicated, well-organized individuals. And they are facilitated, I'll add, by cheaper and more accessible means of communication.
Awesome. Well, Ned, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to have you on the Creator Business Show today. I really enjoyed talking to you about these movements of people that are started by small groups. I did not realize that the churn and the free money available to publishers and others really has to do with making sure people have their credit cards updated. And then also, it was really fascinating to talk about how service journalism, solutions journalism is really driving engagement and is helping publications thrive when they look at the data. So these are all new learnings to me, and I really appreciate you spending the time today to help me and help our audience to understand these concepts better.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I'm gonna plug BlueLena.io if anyone wants to check it out. We are eager to work with all kinds of media sizes, media organization sizes, independent creators, and make sure that they are making sure their churn is covered.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and thank you all for being with us today.
Have a great day.